Good evening and welcome to information session and webinar on capital, where we're going to discuss corporate credit. I'm Dr. Stephanie Ardrey, and I'm the CEO of Blue Diamond Capital and Advisory. I'll be presenting for you this evening. Before we get started, couple housekeeping. This presentation will go about 30 moments or so. If it is that you have questions, don't hesitate to place your questions either in the comment section, or if it is that your questions happen after the live session, feel free to send an email, and the email address is also along the ticker and will be placed. So tonight we're going to go through a conversation regarding capital, and in particular corporate capital, which is debt capital that's available for businesses. I'm Dr. Stephanie Ardrey, as I shared. I'm both the CEO of Blue Diamond Group and the CEO of Zeniverse Wellness Group, where we have a portfolio of wellness, medi-spa-tels, and organic farming organizations, both in existence and opening. With Blue Diamond Group and the conversation for today, we focus on assisting other companies with addressing their customers' capacity and capital requirements. As relates to customers, helping make sure that you are aware of how to acquire and retain those customers across the various segments, recognizing what type of capacity your organization requires, what type of leadership development and other organizational management solutions are necessary, and then finally capital, recognizing and being able to distinguish between both debt and equity options if you have the type of business that is suited for equity. I've had a long history as an entrepreneur. I like to tell folks I started way back when, but as you can see across my journey, I've been at this for over 4 decades, and I've served as both CEO and founder of numerous organizations, as well as an executive leading a number of corporations along my journey. I've been recognized both, and of course, some of my clients are the Fortune 500s and 100s, both with domestic and global footprints. I've been featured across media platforms as well for either various talks and other exposure. But today, we are going to focus on capital around business finance. I'm going to discuss with you why capital is important, when you should begin looking for capital, how to prepare for capital, what some of the sources are for that capital, what exit strategies you should consider, and of course, there's space for questions and answers. So let's go. Capital versus cash. Now, this is an interesting concept. Many entrepreneurs say, hey, I'm going to run my business using cash from operations, without realizing that a decision like that, although may be feasible in some businesses, especially if you have a cash intensive business, but for many businesses, it's not as feasible as you think, especially if it is you're doing business with other organizations that oftentimes pay either using vehicles that pay in a delayed form, or if you're doing business with organizations that pay net 30, sometimes that net 30 turns into 45, and in some cases, even as many as 60 or 90 days before those payments meet your organization. And what that means is if you do not realize the immediate capital being relayed to your organization, and you're looking to make business decisions where you want to deploy that capital, sometimes you find that that cash flow impedes your your ability to execute on your own business plans. And so this is why relying upon cash from operations can sometimes become detrimental to long-term growth as well as sustainable growth for your organization. So when we think about financing a business, entrepreneurs, as I say, should cast a wide net. You need to diversify your sources, and you need to recognize that not all capital should be utilized for the same purposes. And what do I mean by that? When you're thinking about capital, capital has a cost associated with it. And so oftentimes that cost is determined based upon the risk profile that's being associated with that capital. So if it is you are a early stage company and your business lacks a number of milestones. So people wonder, why is it that banks ask you to demonstrate that you've been able to sustain for 2 or 3 years before they'll entertain providing you with a business loan in the form of a term loan or a line of credit for your company if it is that you don't come with capital, with collateral immediately available. That is because the lending institution has no way to determine if it is you're going to be able to execute on the business plans that you've identified, or if you'll be stopped in your progress by some circumstance that causes you to either suspend your operations, delay your operations, or sadly, in some cases, completely dissolve your operations. As a result, these organizations are asking you to demonstrate that you're going to be able to sustain yourself through what is perceived as the most difficult part of launching a business, and that's in its earliest phases. Because of that, the business is considered at its riskiest state. And that means that the capital is going to have a premium on it at that particular phase. So that premium is presented in the form of an interest rate. The interest rate, the cost for the capital, is going to be greater, which is why that same capital is not the capital that you want to keep for an extended period of time. So you too must evaluate the cost of the capital and figure out when you want to replace that capital, meaning once it is that you've mitigating the risk that caused that capital to be priced at a particular rate. Once your business passes those milestones, you want to renegotiate and see if you can secure replacement capital at a more favorable rate. Also, if it is that you're looking at the type of uses for that capital. So if you have a business that requires a brick and mortar location, and in order to operate at that location, you need to go through a series of tenant improvements, you need to install equipment, then the capital that you want to seek for those tenant improvements, for the equipment, is a little bit different than the capital that you might secure for working capital. Working capital would be the capital that you have as cash on hand that you're going to use to maybe secure inventory or meet payroll or pay for items that you have no other source to easily finance. And the reason I say this is if you need equipment, for example, I would advise you to look for equipment financing capital because equipment capital will utilize the equipment as collateral, and oftentimes that is rated based upon the value of the particular collateral rather than just being treated as unsecured, uncollateralized capital, which can improve upon the rate. Also, it's important to consider as a business when you're looking at capital and the cost of capital, you want to keep in mind that a business and its capital requirements, those costs are deducted from the business's tax liability. So you're not going to become overly concerned about the cost of capital as much as you want to ensure that your business is able to support the capital, to meet the cash flow requirements of being able to support the debt requirements. And that's going to be more informative of your decision around your cost over the particular cost itself. The reason that knowing and preparing for capital is so important is because oftentimes getting the capital, making sure that you properly allocate the capital, and more importantly, making sure that you're collecting any outstanding accounts receivables, those particular variables lead to a cash crisis. And oftentimes the crisis occurs before the business realizes that they were on a path toward that crisis. So we want to make sure that we pay attention to not only the capital that's coming into the organization, but are you making the best allocation decisions and making sure that you're not allowing aging accounts receivables to sit on your books without being managed and monitored. And when you're thinking about capital, there are three key types of capital that are important for your business. Fixed capital is the capital that you're using to address permanent fixed assets that your business requires. This again is when you're looking at buildings, land, equipment, and those types of fixed assets that can be utilized as collateral for that capital. Working capital is the capital that you need to pay particular bills, wages, salaries, to keep the organization going. Growth capital is the type of capital that you want to secure when you're anticipating scaling up. Even if you were preparing for an exit and you wanted to take your company public, what you typically plan to do is secure capital so that you have the ability to finance that process. Because one thing that oftentimes is unknown unless you're on that journey, whenever you're looking for equity capital requires a number of actions and investments. And so it costs money to raise equity capital from the beginning to retaining securities attorneys and advice, to understanding the appropriate tools that would be necessary to facilitate the equity infusion into your organization. So there has to be a certain legal structure in place, and that has to be committed to in advance of being able to secure that capital. So again, we're focusing on debt capital in this presentation, recognizing that presentation on equity would be a whole nother conversation with a number of steps specific to securing equity capital. What you want to consider in the beginning, whether it be debt or equity, is what is the amount of capital that you require? What is the use? You would prepare a use of funds summary that would identify how you plan to allocate that capital. And from there, you're better able to make some decisions around what type of capital is going to be best. Is it debt? Is it short-term debt? Is it longer-term debt? Is it a situation where you really do need to explore equity and you want to go down the advisory road to gain some insight about that equity and the various equity requirements? Who would be the sources for the capital if you're looking at debt, and what type of debt? What type of term would you require for that particular capital? Again, is it short term? Is it long term? How is it that that capital will not only enter your business, but how is it that it will exit your business? When you're thinking about debt capital is capital that your business will secure, and it's repaid with interest. It's typically carried as a liability on the company's balance sheet. And in the beginning, depending upon what phase or stage of development your business is in, will determine sometimes the ability to secure that initial capital. And it can be not only challenging to secure, not because it's so difficult to secure, but oftentimes it's the awareness and understanding of the capital process. Oftentimes, if you haven't been in the business of capital, you really don't have the experience or the knowledge. And again, oftentimes people think that getting capital is as simple as going to the bank. And sadly, that's mistake number one. The capital, if you're an early stage company, is not often available at the bank because oftentimes you've made the mistake of beginning a banking relationship with the wrong bank. And so, because of that, the bank that you have a relationship with is not really the bank that's going to be willing to put their deposits. Remember, a bank makes a loan based upon the consumer deposits. So they're using others' funds to issue a loan. And so banks want to put consumers' deposits at risk unnecessarily, especially if they have other methods of making money with those dollars. So it's going to be important to consider what is it that the particular lending organization is using to evaluate your business. And so the sources include, especially in our current economic climate, beyond the traditional banks, business banks, there's government organizations depending upon your business, the sector. Right now, there have been a number of grant programs that have been made available. An often missed opportunity is to build corporate credit for the organization, as well as looking at institutional funds, those types of, um, again, institutions, banks, lenders, and other groups that provide resources for your business. Some of those banks, again, you want to look at the banking relationships that are most relevant for your business. Where are you operating? Are you a mostly domestic business, domestically focused business? Are your consumers across the nation? Are they international? No businesses that you're doing business with, or organizations or customers. That too will inform some of the relationships that you establish on behalf of your business. If you're based in the United States and you're an early stage business and you don't have all of the requirements to secure traditional commercial bank financing, then the Community Financial Development Financial Institution Fund is a resource. What the CDFI does is fund community-based organizations that are mission driven and have specific goals to support earlier stage companies, companies that traditionally lack access to traditional funding options with funding options. And especially when you're a business that's looking for what we call microfinance. These are the organizations that typically provide access to those types of smaller loans. The SBA.gov also has information on funding options as well as grants. And the SBA in times past has both um, fluctuated from being a direct lending source to being a guarantor, ensuring that you're able to secure financing through other lending sources. And so sometimes the SBA serves as a guarantor. That's traditionally the role. However, following the global pandemic, COVID 19, the SBA became active as a direct lender to ensure that some of the smaller businesses that unfortunately had banking relationships with institutions that would not typically provide lending options to those businesses have an alternative source to get access to lending and the capital that was being made available to hopefully save and sustain organizations that were going to be and that were significantly impacted by the global pandemic. Business credit. Business credit is one of these areas where, again, a lot of entrepreneurs are not as familiar with what it is, how it operates, and why it is of benefit to a business. It's credit that's actually established in the name of the business, and it functions differently than credit that you're using. Sadly, by the time that many entrepreneurs find out about business credit, it's often after they have utilized their personal credit and found that they've now either reduced their credit worthiness on their personal credit, and they still need access to additional capital. This is for many reasons, and oftentimes it's again because when you pursue access to debt financing and you don't have a clear strategy, then you're subject to the whims of of organizations, people who are facilitating access to the capital without understanding the risk and the consequences of how you're approaching pursuing that particular capital. So, what I mean by that is traditionally, if you are going after business credit, the business should be able to apply for and secure that credit. If unfortunately you haven't placed your business in position to qualify for its own credit, then someone is serving as the personal guarantor. And that personal guarantor is having their personal credit evaluated each time that they attempt to secure credit for the purpose of the business. And sadly, personal credit works differently than business credit. So each time the personal credit experiences an inquiry, that works as a negative against the personal credit rating and score and viability. Whereas as if the business was being evaluated on its own without impacting a personal guarantor, the business would not suffer a negative impact by having creditors evaluate if it's a credit worthy organization. It would not be a negative impact. Even if the creditor declined issuing credit at the time of the application, there would not be a negative consequence for that business. It's just a matter of waiting, creating a stronger profile, and then reapplying at a later date to secure those commercial credit lines and relationships. And so with business credit, you're able to begin creating relationships as soon as you establish a legal entity. What I mean by that is you're going to establish business credit for either an LLC or a corporation Be that with a corporation, it could be a nonprofit corporation, it could be a for-profit corporation, it can be a B corporation, but it's a legal structure that says that it's a separate entity that exists beyond yourself. If it is that you are a professional and you have a license and you're part of a professional corporation, the same thing. Again, a legal entity that exists beyond an individual becomes the type of entity that can establish business or corporate credit. And so, how you begin the process of building this credit is usually in a particular sequence, meaning that first you want to begin by establishing what we call the vendor accounts. And those are typically your net 30-day types of accounts. And then you build store credit. And then after you've built store credit, then you begin to create what we call cash credit, which is typically available once the organization has established a number of trade lines. When we talk about building business credit is great because as you establish those trade lines and those corporate accounts, oftentimes those accounts that are, like I say, net 30, think about net 30. Net 30 adds 30 days into your cash flow from the release of the cash that you may have. Even if you had the cash in the bank and you could go into a store, for example, and pay for supplies that you need with cash today, compared to having a supply company issue, say, a net 30, your cash is able to work for you for another 30 days, for example, before you release it in order to pay off those expenses. So now you've added 30 days of benefit in your own cash flow. And so that's an advantage. Also, business credit, often the limits start at a higher level than when you're using personal credit, which is very helpful, again, for business purposes. And it also allows a way of separating your personal from your business related expenses. Once again, you establish your business profile, you won't need to continue to utilize a personal guarantee or cause your personal credit to suffer the inquiries. The business serves as its own ability to garner additional credit. And so, this is why it's important to allow your business to begin to be in position to stand on its own. In order for the business to be in the position to stand for its own, creditors don't know what your intentions are. So, what the potential lender does is they evaluate several factors about the information that you've provided on your business. And based upon those variables, they begin to make decisions about if this is a business that they would like to extend credit to, such as is this a legitimate business, or is this a hobby, or is this a fraudulent organization? Because the business in the beginning has very little to no history, the only way that a business can begin to establish credit is by appearing to be on the path to establish a sustainable organization based upon the decisions that you've made. So, one of those early decisions include the telephone number. Legitimate businesses do not operate by using a cell phone number. Mark Zuckerberg, when he launched Facebook, didn't give out his cell phone number. The founders of Google, PayPal, and some of the organizations that we've come to know today weren't founded by using a cell number. They were established by first setting up a business number for consumers to be able to contact the organization with the presumption that the organization is going to be larger than the original founders. And if the business is doing business, again, domestically, nationally, or internationally, in some cases, it makes sense for that business to offer a toll free number. Again, because so many companies are relying upon voice over IP systems to allow them to scale up appropriately or to expand into markets rapidly, many of these business numbers are no longer physically installed, maybe at a brick and mortar location, although many still are. Many operate using virtual numbers or numbers over voice over IP solutions. And so your business should secure its numbers within the name of the business. Next, businesses should also have a fax number. Again, the fax number can be a digitized back in terms of faxes that are digital, that don't require a paper um, distribution of the fax messages, but again, is a number that's dedicated to receive faxes because, believe it or not, still many major corporations communicate certain pieces of information by way of fax. Next, is your business number listed with directory assistance? Can someone call 411 and check your business? Does the information that's shared about your business correlate to the other elements of your business that have been disclosed? For example, does the business number properly identify the business address? Is that business address consistent with other information that's being displayed about the business? Does that information correlate with your business license, your business entity information? Again, the goal is to establish the legitimacy of your organization. Do you have a professional website, landing page that identifies that your business is a legitimate operating organization? Again, this is where a lot of times a lender or a prospective credit issuer will go to scan to make sure that your business is legitimate based on the website and understand a little bit more about your business. Here is where so many businesses mess up. Do you have an appropriate business email? If you are using Yahoo, Hotmail, Gmail, Packbell, any of these other services, you are considered an illegitimate business. Illegitimate business. Again, think about it. You don't email the Google staff at Gmail. You email them at specific email accounts and email addresses to different departments and different functions and different names within the organization. I'm amazed at how many times I see that a business has a URL and then they're still using Gmail or Yahoo as a method of communications rather than going through the process of securing an appropriate business account. Once it is that you establish a new entity, you will have a tax ID number, or EIN, that has been assigned to that new entity. This EIN is the number that helps with both identifying that entity and then from there having the ability for that business to begin to establish its business credit. From the prospect of developing or securing that EIN, then the business sets up a DUNS number, a Dun and Bradstreet number, and this is where the business begins to establish its credit profile. And this is where the business information is being deposited. It's business repository that's ultimately going to establish the rating for how this business is evaluated in terms of its credit worthiness based on several legitimacy factors. Good credit goes a long way. So when you begin to establish your Dun& Bradstreet profile, it's important to make sure that you pay your bills on time. But in the beginning, when you're beginning to establish the profile, paying your bills on time does not mean paying your bills based upon the date that's due. Oftentimes, it means paying your bills as soon as the invoice is issued or even beforehand, because you're looking to establish a pattern that says that this company is going to be and is responsible for paying its creditors. Once the business has a track record, then the business finds itself able to attract unsecured business financing. And so unsecured business financing is financing that becomes available without collateral being utilized. And so this will be typically unsecured amounts. Right now, with some of the lenders, I have several programs that are available for unsecured financing, and they're based upon a personal guarantor if it is that the business is in its early stages. But for businesses that have been established and have a number of trade lines reflecting their establishment and appear to be legitimate, they would be able to secure those same unsecured lines of credit without impact to the personal credit, without the requirement of a personal guarantor. When you're dealing with unsecured financing, the goal is to secure a number of accounts, especially if it is that you have to apply for these accounts in the beginning where a personal guarantor is still required. Again, there's a strategy about how you go about securing unsecured capital in the beginning. The steps in developing trade lines begin usually with getting these net 30 accounts. The goal is to get 15 to 20 accounts on your Dun & Bradstreet profile. So you want to start establishing those initial 5 to 10 accounts that are net 30. That then assists when you begin to build store credit, and store credit assists you when you begin to go for cash accounts. When you think about some of the companies, you're looking at companies that report to credit agencies. So some of these are examples like Uline, Quill Office Supplies, Wells Fargo Business Secured credit cards, and others. Some of the accounts that are offered with a net 30 require that you make an initial purchase so that you can establish your credit with that particular organization. And again, the name of the game is when you establish those lines to begin to immediately be assertive in terms of paying those accounts so that they can create a rating for your business. Revolving store accounts, Staples, Best Buy, Amazon, Office Depot. Once you've had an opportunity to establish the initial net 30 accounts, you want to begin creating relationships with revolving store credit. Again, your goal is to start applying for these types of accounts and do so without using your personal credit so that you can begin to preserve your personal credit. Once you've established several of these accounts, then you want to look at establishing fleet credit. What fleet credit does is allows you to have fleet. If it is that you use your vehicle for business, or if you have a fleet of vehicles that are utilized for your business, you want fleet credit because it assists you with not only fuel, but in terms of managing repairs and maintenance expenses, and allows you to properly allocate those expenses in a sense where you've segregated them from your personal expenses so that again your business is being appropriately credited for the expenses that it is incurring for your vehicle and or vehicles that are necessary. From this, again, once you have those net 30, you have revolving store, and you have fleet accounts listed on your Dun& Bradstreet, this then begins to put you in position for what we call cash credit. And this is presented in the form of high limit corporate cards, as well as trade and term and lines of credit. And for these accounts, once your business is established, you're able to use your company's EIN and your Dun & Bradstreet profile to apply for these accounts without any further impact to your personal Social Security number. You want to again manage these accounts and make sure that you avoid having late or incomplete payments because again, you're establishing a profile for your business. Are there any questions that I can answer at this time? All right. Well, feel free to add your questions to either the comment box or send me an email, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. If it is that you're looking for a quick guide that can assist you with evaluating your business, pick up a copy of my book, Show Me the Money, The 9 P's to Profit, where I help you walk through an overall analysis of your company by looking at the 9 P's that help you put your business on a path towards profitability. The book is available by Amazon. You can also order a copy from my office. Lastly, feel free to reach out. You can reach me specifically at Dr. Ardrey at bluediamondcapital.com. That's to get support from Blue Diamond Advisory or Blue Diamond Capital, and I look forward to assisting you. You can call my office. Our toll-free number is 888-5-BLU-CAP or 949-258-4341. I look forward to assisting you with your capital needs and requirements. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope that I've given you some insight on how you can begin to develop corporate credit for your company. Thanks, and I see you soon.